Okay, now in the previous videos, if you've watched some of these, you will know that we had a quick look at the EGR map, the driver's wish, and saw how the PD150 wanted a little bit more fueling. And then we looked at the torque limit and saw how the PD150 allowed for more torque. And then we saw how that was going to be achieved in effect, because the injection quantity was going to be given more fuel, so we were going to get more fuel with a 150 map, and the smoke limiter was going to not limit that quite so much, so we would literally get more fuel. To get more fuel to burn, we would need more boost, so the boost map showed an increase. To stop the boost map being limited, the boost limiting map showed an increase, and to get the boost overall, excuse me, the N75 map showed an increase. So we've got a whole load of very slight increases, which we then accepted into, or I accepted into, my Passat 130 map. Now I'm going to move into the realms of where things start to get a lot more complicated. So I'm going to move into duration. I'm going to look at duration 0 there, and then I'm going to look for the 150 and look at duration 0 on that one. Now once we start to look at duration, we will, I suspect, see differences, because I do suspect that the injectors are not the same. I've seen many people comment on the internet saying that these two engines use the same injectors, but a brief glance at these maps tends to suggest that that is not the case at all. Now what I'm going to do as usual is, to make life simple, I'm just going to pull off that bit of axis data there. So I'm going to copy that, delete the highlight, go up here and click paste and delete, and that's nothing's happened. So obviously that axis data is exactly the same as this one. And then I'm going to copy that one, copy, and put it in there, and that's the same. So the axes for these two maps, the 130 here and the 150 here, are the same, except that there's a slight reduction here. Looks like a very slight difference there, but again, I'm not convinced that that is that relevant. It's not a great deal, just a slight movement of the axis, I think. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the actual map data, because this is where I suspect we're going to get differences. So I'm going to copy that one, just delete that, go up to here and click paste and delete. Now you can see straight away there is a huge difference between these two maps, and it's being made more clear here. So whereas the axis might have had, look, there's if you can see it on the video, they're blue and they're blue, whereas that might have been a slight change on the axis, the actual data is considerably changed. Now if the data was only changed where the axis was changed, then we could assume it wasn't a big deal, but this would appear to be a very big change, not in terms of big amounts, but quite a lot of changes have occurred here. And we've got a slight increase over in this corner, but generally speaking the duration times are less. Remember, duration, it's not really time exactly, but it will do as a time. It is the amount of degrees of crankshaft that the injector will be open for, so you can think of it as a time in that sense. The fact that this is so obviously different, we've gone from this one onto here and it's made such a big difference, and the fact that the values have gone down, tells me one thing. It tells me that the injectors are not the same. They simply can't be. The PD150 injectors are injecting more fuel. We know they are because we've seen it on the other maps, but they're doing it in less time. Now that is obviously not possible. If it was the same injectors on both engines, then they would be taking longer to inject more fuel, because it obviously takes longer to inject more fuel. So the fact that these values have gone down is telling us that there is a difference in the injectors. There has to be. Now this means that should we now decide, oh, what I'd like to do is I'd like to copy this data across from this 150 file to this 130 file, because I think it will help me remap an engine. Well, clearly it won't, because I will actually end up with less fuel if I do that, because the information over here originally allowed for more duration, and now I've imported changes which allow for less duration. So I've actually made the fueling worse by making that change, and obviously I don't want to do that. So that seems a very unlikely change that I would want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just quickly highlight that. I'm going to edit and click original values so that I'm back where I started. So clearly I don't want to put these figures in here. I've shown you that they're different, and I certainly don't want to copy them across, because it will have been of no use whatsoever on this file. So what I'm going to do next is have a quick look at the next one, just to see what happens. That was duration 0, so I'm going to have a quick look at duration 1 and see if a similar situation arises there. Now again, I'm going to go for the axis data first. It would be helpful if I was on the right map, wouldn't it? So I'm going to go for the axis data first. So I'm going to copy that and then insert that there. And then I'm going to look for the next axis data. Where are we? There we are there. I should have straightened these up first. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to put that in there. Clear that. And while I'm here, I'm just going to straighten these up. It always annoys me if I leave files on maps looking all wonky in front of me. But the axis data is the same, so we've got the same data on both. So what would be interesting to know is what's this main block of data like. So I'm going to click on here and I'm going to highlight this. Now this is a trick that I do all the time, and maybe it's obvious to everybody, I don't know. When I get to here, I'm going to use the scroll wheel, so I've got two hands on the mouse at the same time, so that I just get what I want. Maybe I'm the only person, and maybe it's old age, but it seems to me that when I click and drag and get near the bottom of a page, I often shoot off until I'm in this completely different universe. The whole thing seems to run away with itself, and then I've got to try and get back to where I started. So I've taken to using the scroll wheel. Right, copy, and then I'll go up to here and I will click paste. Just delete that. Right, now again, we've got a few increases here, but we've got an awful lot of decreases, all this blue values that have gone down. And again, that suggests to me that the injectors between the two engines are not the same, and the flow rates are not the same. So again, as before, I'm going to highlight that, and I may not need to highlight this, I may not need to do that at all, but I'm going to highlight that anyway, and I'm going to go and edit and return that to the original values. Now it seems to me that I could go through all of these. I could then go on to the next one down, that one, and compare it with that one. But I don't think there's any point, because if we've now established that two of these don't match, and they don't match in such a way that there would be no point in using data from a 150 on a 130 file, I suspect that all of the duration maps are going to be the same like that. So there would be no point in ever considering putting PD 150 duration maps onto a PD 130 file. Right, now before I close this completely, there's just something that we need to look at, because if we go and look here, We have got on this map a maximum injection quantity of 55 milligrams. Now on the original file we have then a duration allowance for 55 milligrams. We weren't using that. The highest it ever went was somewhere just around 50, maybe just under 50 because of the limiters. And so when the final selection of fueling was finished and the ECU then went looking on here to find out how long the injector should be open, for the most part it was probably using values in the region of 45 to 50 and not these. So if we've used some of the maps from here and put them into a PD130, as long as we haven't dramatically gone over 55, this duration map is perfectly adequate, because up to 55 milligrams the ECU will be able to look at this map, 55 milligrams, here's the value it needs to use. And so this duration map will function quite adequately for an increase of probably around about 20 brake horsepower. So we probably wouldn't need to change this map at all if we were doing a remap of our PD130. So having looked at that and seen that we probably don't need to change it, and then having looked at the fact that if we did change to the values from a 150 we would probably make things worse, the best thing to do is to leave duration alone if we're considering making changes to our 130 file. Right, I'll stop at that point.